for Tuesday, June 27th, 2017 to order. Clerk will please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller,
Here.
Ms. Conwell. Here. Ms. Galucci.
Here.
Mr. Feliciano.
Here.
Ms. Richardson Scott.
Here.
Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh is absent at the moment. Mr. Osby. He's absent at the moment. There is a quorum.
Thank you very much. And is there any public comment related to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Ms. Lou.
Ms. Liu, you may come forward.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon.
Last time, I did come here to tell you my beginning of the observation about the Superior Avenue when they take out all the strange ideas about the safety issue, this and that. Actually, now I have observed even more, and I think it actually is safer, not only for the bus drivers, and also for all the patrons. Because in the past, when they barred the whole area for people to walk, it was not actually walking people could enjoy because people want to catch buses. The connected buses were separated so far away from one another. I have seen all the time elderly people dragging their belongings, trying to catch connected buses far in the other corner. They had to run from the Euclid Avenue side all the way to the West 3rd in order to catch connecting bus, or vice versa, direction-wise. And also maybe parents dragging kids. Don't even worry about the kids are sick or just little. Lots of people were complaining. After they open it up, I have seen all the improvement, including myself. I'm sure I have short legs too, and I don't have to run or get that far to catch a connecting bus. And actually, most of the patrons right now are actually happier. Even waiting for the bus, you still need to wait, but at least not everybody is like angry and upset. And I also think it's good for drivers because I have asked them for their opinions, and they all think that actually helped them to keep on their schedule instead of waiting all the traffic lights to make left turns. So I believe the safety actually has been way better, improved. So next time, we don't know why the city politicians, probably because they don't use public transportations, they don't really see it that way. But next time, I hope our county council people will actually reinforce our opinions to the public. So in that case, the city politicians wouldn't really think whatever in their mind definitely will work, like what happened in this particular case. And I'm really glad that our situation, at least for all the RTA patrons, are really better now. Even that's good for all the drivers too. They don't have to be upset about the traffic lights and the waiting either.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to mention that we have Alicia Washington from the Greater Cleveland Partnership here today, also with her intern Amber. So we're happy to have you with us today. Okay. And also we have Ron Jackson here today, president of the ATU. Glad to have you with us. And next item on the agenda is item number 4, approval of the minutes from the May 11th, 2017 meeting. Those minutes are in your packet. Do we have a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from the May 11th, 2017 meeting. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. Those minutes are approved. We have no legislative matters referred to committee, and under discussion, the first item is that we are going to get a historical perspective on RTA system design, and just to refresh everybody's memory, RTA is going to attend a meeting next month, a forum that is being being put on by the transit center, the national nonprofit organization that presented to us previously, and so they're going to get some information, and there's going to be some looking around at issues relating to system redesign, and I thought by way of perspective, before that occurred, it would be good to get some historical background on what RTA has thought and done and tried to deal with around system redesign. So I now ask the RTA representatives to please make that presentation. Okay, so we have John Palagi. How do you?
Yes, Pelagi.
Pelagi. Okay, from RTA, and if you could tell us a little bit about your title and background, and then go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, thank you for having me here today. My name is Mr. Madison. Said as John Pelagi. I'm the manager of schedules in the service management department at the Greater Cleveland RTA. Actually, I first started RTA as an intern 26 years ago, going on 27 years ago. Been this, and I've worked also at the MPO for Summit County and Portage County. So really been in transportation planning for quite some time, and including many years as the in service planning at RTA and currently in schedules at RTA. I guess I don't have a PowerPoint presentation prepared. I was asked to be here just kind of as a resource to kind of answer questions and kind of give you some idea of the system redesigns that RTA has gone through over the years. So really the size of RTA's system is always determined by the amount of resources that are available to spend on transit service. And so there was initially at RTA, of course, when RTA was formed and the sales tax was available, there was, of course, an initial expansion of service and coordination of services as the different operations within Cuyahoga County were combined, with CTS being the largest part of that, and then some of the suburban operations of North Olmsted and Maple Heights. Some were just continued to operate for many years as a sort of satellite operation with Maple Heights and North Olmsted, but Euclid Transit, Brecksville Road Transit, and those operations were all integrated into RTA. But at that time, keep in mind that the population of Cuyahoga County was 1.7 million people. So, and the sales tax being new, there was an initial expansion of service. Some new routes were started at that point. But really, since that time, population has been in decline in both the city and the county. So as that also, it goes along with that is a decline in the amount of sales tax revenue that's available to operate service. It's really been, if you will, kind of a RTA system has had to contract as a result of that. So we're always responding to what's available to operate service and trying to serve the strongest transit markets that are available to us. In more recent times, RTA did go through a significant redesign of the network in the mid-90s. It was called a comprehensive operational analysis. A consultant was hired, collected data, made recommendations. It was branded as transit transformation. A number of changes were implemented. Also about that time, even though population was in decline, both in the city and in the county, sales tax revenue was at least keeping up with costs. And this is the time where it's the era in which we could expand the network somewhat and operate more hours and miles of service. And this is when we started the circulator routes. But that could last as long as the sales tax revenue was there to be able to support that larger network. And also in that, so then as we get out of the 90s and into the early 2000s, things were, revenue-wise, were at least stable enough that we couldn't expand anymore, but we weren't in a more of a crisis situation where we had to make drastic reductions. So we took that opportunity during that era to look at corridors one by one, and this is around the 2004, 2005 era. And we looked at the Southeast Corridor, we looked at the South Corridor going down towards Parma, North Royalton, and then one of the last ones we did was the West Shore Corridor. And each of those, we looked at the routes in that area and how the street network had changed, freeways, that maybe hadn't been taken into consideration. At the time, the route network, the one that was there at the time, didn't necessarily take into account. Or even better connections to the rapid transit. Those were each looked at, and the network in that area was improved. And again, not an expansion, but just looking to make sure we're efficient. How are we serving this corridor with the best network of routes available? So that gets us about 2005. In 2006, we're starting to prepare for Euclid Corridor. So there's a lot of changes that need to be made in the downtown area with the transit zones that were going to be put in place on Superior and St. Clair. And that's when the trolleys replaced the downtown loop routes. And then we get into 2007 and 2008 with the start of the Euclid Corridor line. A lot of changes. There was some other additional changes that needed to be made in the downtown area to support that. But that's also when the first thing that RTA had to deal with was, this is when fuel prices skyrocketed. And as the biggest consumer of diesel fuel in Northeast Ohio, we were hit really hard. And so we had a large round of service reductions in 2008 to respond to that. And then in 2009, we started getting into the recession, and we had to reduce service again. Fares were going up, and we got into that cycle. And 2010 was the last major service reduction. But in each of those times, we took an opportunity to rethink the network and to say, look, we can't afford to run as dense of a network with maybe east-west routes every block. And we had to focus ourselves on the stronger routes, on the stronger streets in the network, and where we could operate more frequently because we're starting to concentrate riders on those. So we applied those principles of service planning as we redesigned the network. And, maybe in an area we couldn't support 2-3 crosstown routes. So we spaced them a little further apart and focused it on the strongest segments and linked those together to form stronger routes. And then after that major reduction in 2010, revenue kind of stabilized a bit, and at one time we thought maybe perhaps we're going to have to go through another round of this almost every year until we were down to perhaps one garage. And which was a very frightening thought. But thankfully that didn't happen, and things kind of stabilized, and we actually put a few street segments that had lost service. We restored some that we felt were areas where, it's like, okay, it's not maybe as bad as we thought. We could probably restore a little bit. And so a couple streets restored some service to that were cut initially in 2010. And that kind of gets us to where we're at today. We continue to make more minor adjustments to the network, thinking, well, maybe this part's not working out so well. There's just not ridership being generated there. Where it can be a little more efficient and serve the residents in a better way. Maybe a good example of that in this area would be Steelyard Commons opened up down in the flats. And initially we had one route that served it. And then as things kind of, we're like, okay, can we do something better here? And we took a couple crosstown routes from the east side and we went down to Steelyard Commons with that. So that's an example of looking at different areas, smaller areas of the county, and say, let's rethink this little part of the network. Can we better serve the residents with a change in route alignments? Now, and then in 2016, most recently, we did have to go, unfortunately, through another round of some smaller cuts. They were, again, budget-driven. A lot of this is, we'll run as much service as we can with the resources we have available. And so we went through that minor set of service reductions in the fall. And right now, of course, as everyone knows, we're hoping that the funding situation is resolved in Columbus regarding the sales tax on the managed healthcare, Medicaid, the managed healthcare program, so that we don't have to face what could be potentially a really devastating reduction in resources, which would lead to an even larger round of service reductions. So let's kind of give you a quick overview, I mean, a quick but a brief overview of where we've been, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Ms. Galucci.
This isn't a question, it's more of a comment. And I'd like the record to reflect that during the 90s and the 2000s.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Did you press the button?
Sure. I would just like the record to reflect that during the 90s and the 2000s, when the RTA was stable and service was either increased or kept the same, I was the budget director there, and just saying. No, actually, I concur with Mr. Pelagi's reflection of the history, but I do want to add that in the 90s and the 2000s when I was there, it wasn't that the revenue was flush. There were also challenges, but the comprehensive operational analysis that he mentioned did allow us to do a lot with efficiencies. And then during my tenure there, when we worked on contract negotiations, I will say that we always had successful negotiations, and the men and women of the ATU really worked with us to deliver that service in a way that was very positive.
I'd like to mention that during the presentation, actually Singh joined the meeting. Thank you for being with us. Are there any other questions by members of the committee? Ms. Conlow?
Mr. Pelagi, based on what you last stated in regards to 2016, another round of cuts and they're budget driven, is there a backup plan RTA has prepared for if the Medicaid sales tax doesn't go the right way?
Yes, that contingency is being worked on.
Okay, but it's not complete yet?
No.
Okay. Is there any way to share that with this committee?
I think it would be premature to do so at this point.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Singh.
Thank you for your presentation. For the 2016 fare hike and cut, it was 2% service reductions. Do you
I don't
remember
recall the percentage. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
And maybe Jose, correct me if I'm wrong too, but I just wanted to bring up kind of what the numbers that I at least can best recall. We had a 2% service reduction with the fare hike that resulted in about an 8% year-over-year loss in ridership. And then right now we have next year's fare hike coming. In terms of the MCO sales tax, it's about $20 million loss annually starting 2019. And is the number about 10% that we're looking at in terms of service that could threaten? If you have any, either of you have a. That's the estimate that we've had, but just trying to get some clarification. Sure. I guess the kind of what that lead is to the question is if there's obviously cuts can't stabilize bus ridership, but just in terms of planning, in terms of anchoring bus service network to our rapid transit network, a little more kind of in terms of, so it's not as radial of a bus network, but relies on our rail and BRT corridors. In terms of that kind of planning, is that a focus in going forward, or is that, I mean, I just kind of looking for if that's being discussed.
I think we've done about as much as we can to really avoid duplicating. So let's imagine, so you're familiar with the rapid transit network. Okay, so maybe you're familiar with the former route, this number 75, which came from North Olmsted. Okay, it used to go all the way downtown. Okay, and as part of 2010, the major reduction says, it'd be great for this bus to keep going downtown. Lots of riders like that. It's a one-seat ride.
Right.
Okay. And remember, downtown is our best market. Okay, because transit always does well with taking many to one location. It does not do very well in a non-dense area like Cleveland and Cuyahoga County are. It does not do well with the many to many. Okay. But that's an example of where we had a bus route, it would visit a rapid station, sometimes in different route alignments, it visit 2 rapid stations on the way downtown. And some riders would get off and transfer, but a lot wanted to stay on the bus. That bus does not come downtown anymore. Okay, we did that other places, Madison Avenue and Lakewood, used to continue all the way downtown via Madison and Bridge. It doesn't anymore. It ends at West Boulevard Rapid Station now. So that was part of the thinning of the network, spreading. So, we used to be on Detroit. We used to be on Franklin at one time, Bridge, and Lorraine. Every east-west block had a bus route. So we thinned it to concentrate the riders on the strongest streets so that we could offer the best frequency. So it might be a 3, 4, 5 minute walk, but when you get there, that's the best frequency we're going to be able to provide as opposed to spreading ourselves so thin. There's really not a lot of opportunities left to say, okay, this bus won't go downtown anymore. You need to transfer to a Healthline or to the Rapid. The last opportunity to do that was with the number 9 on Mayfield. Okay, we had a limited number of trips that went downtown during rush hours, but we did improve by Little Lily station opening. That's a much better connection to the Red Line, and it still goes to the clinic because that's another employment center and has a connection to the BRT. There's really not a lot of other opportunities to do that, and really the only way to create a non-downtown center network would be to take resources off those corridors that lead to downtown, like a Detroit, Lorraine, St. Clair, Superior, which are still some of our strongest market, and take that and put it on a crosstown route that feeds and would make that service more attractive, but it will not result in a significant increase in ridership. So a lot of our once-an-hour crosstown routes, you might see like 10 people on the bus. If you go to twice an hour, it might go to, so in that hour, you might get 12, 15, but per bus, you only still see 7, 8. Okay. So you're going to have, in some cases, 100% increase in cost on that route, but a much smaller increase in ridership. Of course, we wish that we had the resources to be able to double the frequency on the crosstowns and not take away from the strongest market and just have a stronger network that was available for folks to be able to choose and say, well, you know what, this is now a more attractive choice.
And was there significant loss in terms of, were we seeing folks like from North Olmsted, for example, were we seeing them just heading to the Rapid on the bus then and then taking the transfer, or was there a significant loss by that route having service cuts?
So some riders, you will find they would have gone to said, okay, I'm just going to go park my car at the North Olmsted Park and Ride lot. Some will go to the Rapid altogether, and some we just lost forever. Unfortunately,
kind of a third. Did it look like a third of that kind of ridership, or?
I haven't looked at the data recently to see what, you'd have to kind of look at the whole corridor and say, what's the total boardings in this quarter before and total boardings afterwards. But system-wide, from the 2010 cuts, we did see increases in ridership. As fuel prices went up, now fuel prices are going down. The other thing, too, that we see in effect is part of that fare increase, that the most recent one, part of it was also to say, now if you're, we did for a while, we had, if you had the ADA, if you're qualified to ride ADA paratransit, you could ride fixed route for free. What's interesting, we're finding on a number of routes is once you had to pay the reduced fare, is some of those trips are just not being made.
Right.
So that's where some of that decrease in ridership is also happening there too.
Yes.
It does sound like the RTA continues to look for the most effective way of delivering that service. And so it does sound like the revenue side of the equation is the one that we need to pay more attention to. But I do have a couple questions there without having studied the figures, as I once had the opportunity to do. What has been generally the decline in sales tax by percent? I mean, what are we, and in the decline in ridership, and I mean, have we mapped that out to see what and how that's happened? I mean, I often would put those kind of statistics together, and that might be helpful for us to take a look. And along with sales tax, my question is also about the fares. What kind of fare? I know we've increased the fares, and typically with the Simpson-Curtin rule, when you're looking at the elasticity, that would allow us to decrease, the ridership potential projections by, I think, 3% for every 10 cents you increased or something to that effect. But what I'm concerned about is that we're not collecting, or we're losing fares perhaps on some of the like either on the trains or the BRTs, where it's sort of an honor system. I'd probably way too much for you to capture, but something you might want to take back. And, I'd like to see, since they removed booth attendance, we had savings in booth attendance, but did we lose revenue because we're not collecting fares anymore? And so those are the kind of things that I think ought to be something, and I'm sorry that Joe's not here to hear this, but certainly Joe and I can have the discussion, but those might be areas that you look at.
Yeah, I'm sorry, not the best person to speak to the, tracking.
To the revenue side, yeah, I know.
Side of that, tracking that with the ridership and so forth. But, and the other thing too is, we've looked at, I don't have the data to say, they've looked at, how much fare evasion there is on a proof of payment system, and whether we're on par with the rest of the nation.
But even if we're on par with the rest of the nation, it's still money that we're losing. And so, okay, if we're par with the nation for losing, 25, which I'm just throwing a number out there to make the point. If we're on par with the nation for losing 25% of our fares for fare evasion, okay, we're like everybody else, but we don't want to be like everybody else. We want to collect 100% of it. And if there's some, fare evasion, maybe it's 99, you're up to a 99%, but just sort of making that point, yeah.
Like you mentioned, what's the cost to make it 100%? Is that worth it for that thing?
Understood. So that's why it depends on what the component numbers are, and I will also concur with your analysis about you've probably done as much as you can do with using the rails or the buses to feed into the rail lines. I mean, I think you guys have probably pulled all the rabbits out of the hat that you can for making the bus system and even the rail system more efficient, and that probably has led, unfortunately, to some difficulties or challenges then to maintain some of that ridership too.
Ms. Gallucci leads right into my question, so thank you for that. I know that when we heard the presentation from the Transit Center, they talked about focusing on a small number of routes that were the very best routes and increasing the frequency of those and connecting them to the rail system and connecting them to cross routes in a kind of block system so that more people went to the high frequency routes and used them. And that's a lot of what they said. But in your presentation, it sounds like you've already done a lot of that. And the question I have is how optimistic are you that there's more that can be gleaned from the Transit Center's analyses that RTA can effectively use to gain greater efficiencies, or do you think that the upside is pretty limited because of what you've already done?
I think the upside's pretty limited. So, if you look at what some systems have done, where they've gone to more of a grid system, and less of a radial system. So right now, so in order for that to be an attractive network for riders, it has to be high frequency. You're talking 3 trips an hour, 4 trips an hour, 15-20-minute headway. You look at our routes that meet that criteria, and it's the radial routes. It's the strongest market for us, okay? It's the 3, the 1, the 22, the 26, 14, 15, the 51 family. So and those are areas where you have to serve those areas. That's where the strongest demand is. So you can't take anything from those. And they're load-driven routes. So really the frequency is based on how much demand there is. It'd be great to add on to that, so you look at some of our crosstown routes, the strongest ones being like the Warrensville Center route, on the 41, the number 10. Those are some of our strongest crosstown routes. They're already at either 4 to 2 trips an hour. Okay. Our other crosstown routes are either half hourly or 40 minutes. And we would need additional resources to add that frequency. So, and then we could have kind of the best of all worlds. We'd be meeting the radial, the strong market, and adding this additional high frequency network on top of that for that. So you don't necessarily have to go downtown to make your connection. But given where we're at financially, this is aside from minor things here or there, or just deciding that some of these areas we just can't afford to serve anymore. It's a very efficient network, and it's the best one that we can afford right now.
Okay, well, I greatly appreciate the presentation, and we have more to ask about, so please proceed, Ms. Scott.
I certainly appreciate the need to try and right-size the system based on revenue and sales tax and the need for a high-frequency grid. But I'm wondering if, looking at our radial routes, our high spoke and hub routes, are we missing any of our major employment centers, and is there anything to be gained by taking a look at where those are, and if we've effectively lost significant ridership because we can't create that grid system that's high frequency?
So the first part was, are there employment centers that we're missing? Not really in Cuyahoga County. Okay, I mean, there's some that we had to cut off the network. So east of 271 on Cedar, unfortunately, that includes Ursuline College. That was that was in the fall of 2016. That one came off the network. So we're not there, but we've been there, and we were there for a long time, and we know what sort of ridership that would yield. Okay, so there's not a lot of potential there. Okay, it's great to serve it as long as we can afford it, but you have to look at what's the greatest number of people that we can benefit with the limited resources we have. And so unfortunately, so there are some that we're missing, but we also know, because we've served them, we know what sort of ridership they result in, and we'd love to serve them if we could afford them, but right now we can't. So then the second part to what you asked about was?
Right, I'm trying to overlay one of the things, and I work with RTA for a long time with the Welfare to Work program, so some of these routes are ones that we wanted to create to generate ridership. But one of the things that was always difficult is because of the tradition and the nature of the route system, there were not a lot of intra connections. We couldn't create that grid. So there are whole neighborhoods or whole communities that perhaps could be new riders or increases in riderships if you could create that grid there and feed to your transit centers or your linear routes. And so I'm wondering if you've done that analysis as a part of any of your redesigns, and if like for the example, the employment centers that are missing, do we know the intra-community connections that we're not tapping into in the outer areas of the county because they're not connected to the radial system?
Well, we know where we just had to, pull back from. Okay, so we know those areas that we haven't gone to. We know what sort of ridership they would generate. We'd love to have them back on the network in some manner. So I'm not sure. So to
I'm
answer,
asking, in the aggregate, you know, or is there a significant mass out there of ridership that we're not tapping into or missing for these cost concerns?
there are people making the trips. It's how do you convert them to transit riders? Okay, we're always going to be at a disadvantage so you look at an area like that, Lander Haven area, the Landerbrook area, and where are people coming from? All over, outside of Cuyahoga County, Lake County, Geauga County. And as I said earlier, we don't do it's a many to one, but the concentration that they're so scattered, you know. So downtown also works because not only is it concentrated, but you have a financial. So one of the things that starts to influence your mode choice is, okay, so some of it's congestion. So the rapid is superior in that consideration because it avoids the traffic. Okay. It won't be as fast as your car if there were no traffic, but it's consistent. You can avoid that traffic. You have parking fees. In an area like Lander Haven area, there's no parking fees. Okay. So we don't have that incentive. You look at the cost of the fares as they go up. Okay. You look at what it costs to operate your car is like 10 cents a mile. If you have access to a car, we're at a financial disadvantage. So in a downtown area, we can get people who are headed there, but also you can also that builds also what makes that a strong market is you have you can take the many to one and also the many to many and build them together to provide enough ridership to support the routes. And you don't have that with a suburban employment like that. You have the many to a one, but they're so scattered and you can't build on top the other parts of the many to many. It becomes such a long trip by transit that it's just hard to compete.
Commute. I'm really not thinking of those who are coming downtown. I'm thinking of those who need to get out. So I'm thinking of those pockets.
Yes.
And how can you build ridership in the outer areas to get to those pockets? And is it worth that conversation for RTA?
Again, it's always going to be low ridership for us. It's going to be, we're going to have a very small mode split in those areas. We're always going to have that. So they're always the ones that are vulnerable to the changes in the amount of revenue that's available. So we know where those areas are. Some are able to continue. So Brecksville Road is really, it has some downtown market, but it has almost a very similar reverse commute market. Okay. And for now, that's sustainable, but yet it was also on the list in fall. So these things are always on the endangered list. Those are always the ones that are most endangered, but yet they're important to keep as long as we can because that's your way to get to work for folks who need a job. And really then in some cases, while the other part of the network has more ridership, if you don't have those, you're going to lose ridership on the rest of the network. So you don't want to get rid of them, but you try to serve the strongest ones you can with the money you have. So the more you serve them, yes, you will add riders to it. But it's not going to be a high mode split. It's not going to be high numbers, but it helps contribute to the strength of it, the network, and just the total system-wide ridership. But they're always on that endangered list because they're always going to be low.
Well, the problem is that the businesses are building new employment centers in outlying areas, and then they're coming to RTA and saying provide a service. Where what we need is to have the development take place in areas that's transit accessible. Which gets us to item B in our discussion, which we'll get to shortly. But for now, Mr. Singh is next.
Oh, I just had one last question with regards to you had mentioned the actual service, attractiveness as a ridership key, and one of the questions I had was specifically with regards to getting dedicated bus lanes in high congestion corridors. That proved really difficult this past year in our main transit hub, but curious about how that looks going forward. For example, like a West 25th, where you have second most ridership in the area, where you actually have a parking lane pretty much through most of the day, that not even if it was all hours, but, you know, kind of how tenable would that be? How is the relationship with the city's engineering department to see that thing kind of going forward? Do you think that this is something they're prioritizing?
Well, I know that it's West 25th is one of the priority corridors, and there's work being done on that. I'm not the best person to speak to it. So, you know, in schedules, we're down to the implementing the schedule. I can tell you if we had dedicated lanes on that, ones where the bus can, the ideal thing is stay in the same lane, continue a straight path. You can stop at the stop. People can easily get on and off. If the parking's recessed, that's that or doesn't exist. But if we can stay in a lane and keep going and not having to get in and out of traffic, that just allows us to go as quickly as possible. And the quicker you go, sometimes that makes you more efficient. Okay, so that frees up a resource perhaps to be used elsewhere. Okay, so they can make our operations more efficient, and makes the service more attractive because it's not taking as long. You know, you're more competitive with the auto in that same corridor. But I'm not the best person to give a prediction of is it going to happen or not. I'm sorry.
Sure, no.
But, okay.
Anecdotally, I was reverse commuting the 51 to Strongsville, and yeah, that initial 10 minutes was the entire delay. The rest of the Pearl Road, all of it was fine. It was just West 25th. It was initial 12-minute delay, and you know, it's not like there's a giant lot of free parking right behind the market, but maybe that's something to look at. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming down and for your presentation. And now we're going to move into the NOACA Transit-Oriented Development Report.
Yes, the most exciting part of the agenda today. No. Just to give you a quick background, in 2016, NOACA partnered with RTA and Cleveland Neighborhood Progress to put out an RFP for consultant services to come up with a transit-oriented scorecard and implementation plan. AECOM won the bid, and we started work, and we just finished work in April of this year.
And could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I am Kelly Britt, Senior Transit Planner from NOACA. What's going on with this?
Okay.
Yeah, I tried, but it's like, let's see. Sizing is off. There we go.
It's good.
Okay. So, just an overview, we broke up the study into two phases. So phase one is we did a typology and metrics and scorecard assigning all of the transit stations and high priority bus corridors as designated by RTA. Two, to come up with a TOD program for NOACA to run at a later time. And three, how to work in aging in place strategies to keep our seniors in their homes, to take transit and to have better pedestrian access to transit. Phase two was an implementation strategy to where we picked 3 pilot sites, and those pilot sites got a deep dive of a drill down analysis, market analysis, implementation plan, and community involvement plan. So task one was the typologies. So our scope was to, as I said before, analyze the rail stations and priority bus corridors. So each station, each corridor was given a typology and a score.
What is a typology?
That's the next slide.
Okay.
So the typology is basically how the physical layout of the area is. So the station, whatever physical elements are going on around the station, got assigned a place type in this typology. So the typologies were a metropolitan core, a town center, a neighborhood center, a main street, neighborhood residential, industrial transitional, or special destination. Special destination is basically like the airport. Everyone's just going there, but no one's like leaving. So our readiness scores we used were long-term, emerging, ready, and arrived. So after each place got a type place, then we scored it for readiness for transit, for development around transit. Our subscore rankings to score the readiness, we used subscore rankings, which were connectivity, market strength, land availability, and institutional support. So this is just a map of how we laid out the place types for each station in each corridor. It's a little hard to see at this range, but you have it in your packet. We also did the same for the bus network. The difference was the bus network, we broke it out in segments. For the rail stations, the normal catchment area is about a quarter mile to a half a mile around the rail station. For the bus network, because they were longer and went through multiple neighborhoods and multiple cities, we decided to use them as segments. So whatever segment was most alike in that neighborhood got that segment name for the typology or the readiness score. And so there were over, I believe, 400 different segments that were analyzed. To break down what we mean by the readiness, the station, if it's long-term, it means it really needs intervention from multiple actors to get the transit station on the corridor ready for development. Emerging is, it has some, needs less intervention than the long-term, but still needs a good amount of intervention to get it ready for development. Ready is pretty much done. Maybe a zoning change right quick and it's ready for development. And arrived is kind of a place like West 25th, like it's built out. It's not much you can do around there except maybe enhance the amenities around the station. So as I spoke of before, the readiness scores, the connectivity is what's around the station. When you get off the station, where do you connect it to once you get off? The market strength, how is the real estate looking around that station? Can it be developed quickly or will it take longer? Land availability, is it vacant land available around the station? Or even if it's occupied, is it easily purchased for development? And institutional support, what areas or organizations around there can come in and give support to what's going on? Here's another map of the readiness scores just for the rail network. And this is still off. As well as the bus network is the same layout. So each segment got either a long-term, emerging, ready, or arrived. In the transit-oriented development world, emerging and ready are the two typologies that you want to use when you're ready to develop around the station. So phase 2 was implementation. What were we doing? We did a market analysis, an implementation plan, and a community engagement strategy for each pilot station. We decided to go with 3, and how do we get to those 3? We decided that they needed to be emerging or ready, represent both east and west side, represent rail and bus, with or without industrial, it really didn't matter, and is it replicable in other places in the city? So we chose the West Boulevard station in Coudale. It's on the west side, it's on the red line, and it connects to the Detroit Avenue bus corridor. We chose the East 116th station because it's the east side, it's the blue and green lines. It's a lot of current development going on around there. as well as it's very close and connected to the recent renovated Woodhill Station. And as far as the bus corridor, we went with the Broadway Slavic Village. Another is on the east side, but it's a heavily traveled corridor, and the 55th station is nearby, and that can be a connection point. So the goal was to provide apples-to-apples market analysis. So each station, each pilot area got a market analysis, a deep, robust market analysis, which I didn't bring because it's about 150 pages. But all of that is available on our website if you want to take a look. We wanted to definitely explicitly link between the revitalization, and TOD of each station or corridor. We assigned a catalyst project, so each pilot site, along with being studied, we picked one area that would have a good area to have a catalyst project, which would help the neighborhood and the CDCs or whatever promote TOD in the area. So we also gave them an implementation plan, some age-in-place strategies from around the country to maybe implement, and also figure out how we as NOVACA could help support these endeavors later on. So the first station is the West Coudale Station. We decided it was good for joint development with RTA because there's a vacant land around the station and RTA owns it. So this is before picture of what the station looks like now. And this is after. As you can see, we made it mixed use, so there will be retail at the bottom and apartments at the top, circulating buses around the station, as well as connecting to the rail. On the by the other side of the rail station, we have more apartments and or it could be more retail, but we decided that it was linking to the neighborhood. It's a lot going on right now with renovations of buildings in the area, so we thought that was a good place to place a catalyst project.
It's not done yet.
Huh?
It's not done yet.
No, this is just all conceptual. Yeah. No, we wish it was getting done, but it's not. Next is the 116th Street Station, which basically around the station is kind of built out. So we decided to go with more infill opportunities on Buckeye. So we picked nodes along Buckeye and 116th to where we could put more mixed use and or apartments, market rate apartments that would lead and connect to the transit station. So this is a before picture of what's going on now. And here's the after. So we added mixed use and apartments in different nodes, boulevarded Buckeye, and use the traffic calming elements to connect it to the existing station. Broadway Slavic Village. This was a priority bus corridor. We had a lot going on here. There's a lot of development on its way and happening in Broadway Slavic Village. But we decided to use the St. Alexis Hospital site and the velodrome. So this is the before picture. And this is after, with townhouses clustered in the back. The theme would be connecting to the velodrome, as well as along Broadway, there would be boulevarded and retail that would face, excuse me, that would face Broadway. As I stated before, each pilot site has a aging in place strategy to try to get seniors to stay in their homes. And so each pilot site talks about what is good and what is bad about aging in place in that area. Each site got a community engagement strategy, which ended up working out. I have a success story. Last week, Coudale decided to do a trolley ride. Well, they had us come and present this to the community and then do a trolley ride around the sites and other development station around the station to show them what could be in the area, and the neighborhood loved it. It was well received. So this is what we were trying to do as NOACA, is to be a platform and a place where people can discuss these items, because we don't have any land use or zoning authority, but we can always be there for discussion and to promote these kind of things. So that's it. Now, it was a very robust, Grace was there. This was probably 100-something slide presentation, so I really did reduce it down to just give you the highlights. So on our website at noaca.org, if you click on the transportation tab and then on the transit tab, you will see all of the presentations, the market analysis, the report, everything is all right there. So any questions?
Well, thank you very much. That was an excellent and concise summary, and really gave us a very good idea about the world of transit-oriented development, which is, I think is a very important concept that we're going to have to deal with going forward. Questions by my colleagues? Yes, Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair, I just have one. Back on your slide on the TOD readiness framework, you talked about the ready and the arrive. Does RTA have more ready typography or arrive?
RTA has more emerging and ready. Those are the most that RTA has right now.
So do you have those figures anywhere? Because I know
Yes, they're in the report as well.
Okay.
We used actual data, so all that's available.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, Akshay.
Thank you for this. I was curious about any of the north-south corridors on the east side, and kind of what potential was seen as TOD corridors, kind of specifically thinking about 55th, 105th, and then even potentially kind of the Lee roads, but especially 105. And like, is that something where, I don't know if there's like more of a kind of a potential map, or if it was based on like what's high frequency service right now, but
All that was scored. The only reason why we didn't go into 105th or the Woodhill Station is because that's part of the Thrive 105 study, and AECOM is doing that as well, and so they don't want to re-study what they were already studying. So that's the only reason why it's not part of this.
is that ongoing, or is that finished?
That's still going on.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions? Okay.
No, I mean, I slayed it then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a lot to get our arms around. Yes.
I just wanted to recognize NOACA staff person Kelly Britt and acknowledge that she and the consulting team she led did an outstanding job on this, and we expect to move into the implementation and actually get things done.
I would just like to add that I think the study was very well conceptualized with the idea of doing the broad scale analysis of all the major rail and bus routes, and then narrowing it down to 3 very specific examples and looking at them in great detail, and that just provides a template as to how this can be done in both those 3 areas and also in other areas. So thank you very much. It's very helpful.
And Kelly will be representing the NOACA region, Cleveland region, at Revolution to present this item as well.
Great. And where and when is that taking place?
It's a national conference that's taking place.
3rd week of September in Denver.
Okay. Good luck.
Thank you.
That sounds great. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the update on the state budget, and I had expected that by this time that the conference committee would have completed its work and that it would be sent to the legislature for an up or down vote. The the deadline for completing the budget process is June 30th. However, that has not happened. The conference committee is scheduled for a meeting at 3:00 this afternoon, and the House and Senate are scheduled for legislative sessions tomorrow. The expectation is that the conference committee will complete its work either today or tomorrow, and then when it gets to the House and Senate, they have to vote on the conference report up or down. They can't make any amendments, and then it goes to the governor's desk, and the governor can line item veto things out, but can't add anything in. And from what I hear, there is still an understanding and a belief in the importance of a permanent solution on the Medicaid sales tax issue. So there's still some hope that they can come up with something that's beyond the 1-year solution that's in the current bill. On Wednesday, June 14th, I went down to Columbus along with Maggie Keenan, the county director of budget and management, and we both testified on state budget issues, with the Medicaid sales tax being our primary focus. And also, other representatives spoke on this as well, so that when we got done, Senator Matt Dolan said that you've heard from representatives from urban counties, suburban counties, and rural counties, and they all testify as to the seriousness of this problem, and we have to do something about it. So we will find out about that in the next 48 hours or so. So stay tuned, and when I hear the report, I will send out an update to everybody on the committee. And also, we expect to have a legislator or other representative come to our next meeting on Tuesday, July 11th at 1:00. And so we'll get the full report on the Medicaid sales tax and the GRF. And also at that next meeting on July 11th, I would like to focus on an idea that our Vice Chair, Ms. Conwell, brought forward, which relates to the fact that this committee goes out of existence on December 31st of this year, and this committee is probably not the best way long term to advocate for public transit in Greater Cleveland. What we more likely need is a non-governmental organization, a consortium of really high-level people across the spectrum of stakeholders in this area to carry on an ongoing effort to try to reverse the lack of state support, to develop an ongoing permanent funding source to and deal with transit-oriented development and all of these really big picture issues. And so between now and the next meeting, I would like if people could start to think about how an organization like that might be structured, who would be the people that should be on it, how many people should be on it, how it should be staffed, and such things, and hopefully at the next meeting we can start to flesh that out, and we certainly want to have a detailed recommendation on that subject before this committee completes its work, and maybe beyond that, some initial steps at implementation, so that it just doesn't fall off when we get done. So that's the next meeting, and also, unless anyone feels a strong need otherwise, I will say that I'm inclined to cancel the meetings that we have scheduled for July 25th and for August 8th. They're both meetings where the council meets at 3 o'clock, and there's potential scheduling difficulties, and I think we can take what we heard today and take the results on the state budget and take our initial work on the successor organization, and after the meeting on July 11th, we can take a couple months without meeting and just kind of do some thinking, planning, informal interacting, and then we'll come back in September and see where we are. Does that make sense to folks? Okay. So that's what we'll do. And does anyone have any further comment on either the state budget or the preview of the next meeting? Hearing none, has anybody requested to speak on public comment?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other miscellaneous business? Okay. Thank you very much. There being nothing further, we stand adjourned.
Thank you.